Pretty much exactly a year before closing the purchase of our Piemontese farmstead in January, we went to see our first property in Italy. But finding and buying our dream house took much longer than just that 1 year. About 10 years passed between making the decision to find ourselves a farmhouse in the middle of nature sometime and somewhere, and eventually finding that house in the north of Italy. This week we want to share this story with you, because on our own journey, these have been the stories that we've missed hearing. There's more than enough definitive guides to buying a house in Italy out there, but what we craved were the personal stories of people who went before us and actually did what we were dreaming of. This is the story of our personal experience, the choices that we made, and the fears and doubts that we had to overcome. I think it all started 10 years ago when we began dreaming of a slower paced life in the middle of nature, somewhere in the countryside. When we met about 18 years ago, we were both living and studying in cities, and our life together has always been in the city or in the suburbs. Even though I grew up in a much more rural setting, and I've always felt at home in both, I think we've both always felt that our life was supposed to be either in the middle of the city, close to museums and cultural events and libraries and good cafes, or in the middle of nature. Around 10 years ago, we started to do some woofing. We went to a few farms in Germany to help there for 2 weeks in the summer. And we had some friends move to the countryside, also in Germany, some friends that went to Sweden, and more people in our surroundings were doing the thing that we were dreaming of. It definitely hasn't always felt possible for us. We've doubted it many times along the way. Sometimes your mind craves a linear process where, there's like a very clear sequence of steps to take to make it all happen, and we wanted to go faster, and there's times when you want to give up on the dream. But yeah, for us it began a long time ago, and from there we've just moved one foot in front of the other slowly for years, and now it has happened.
It is happening. Of course, we've thought of going back to Belgium or staying in the Netherlands, but the kind of house that we would like to live in, old and spacious and in the middle of nature, is just too expensive for us here in the Netherlands. The housing market is crazy here. We had to look abroad for that. So that's why we started looking at other possibilities.
And I think also, even if we could make it work financially, then it would still feel like a lot of work for something that would never feel like the thing we really want. So it would always feel like a bit of a compromise. I've moved to the Netherlands for love. Like I would have never moved here if it weren't for Bertus. And even though in the 8 years that I've been living here, I have made a lot of friends here that I love, but I've never been able to really feel at home in the Netherlands as a place. I've never been able to really connect to the country as a physical place. And it has nothing to do with that the Netherlands aren't beautiful, because they are. There are so many beautiful places, and I've enjoyed walking the beach here and the dunes and the woods and the heathlands. But it's just that the overall landscape here, and especially in the area where we live, the landscape is so empty. There's villages and then kilometers of meadows and ditches.
It's all quite flat.
Yeah, it's flat and empty, and there are very little trees here. So basically your horizon is, you're looking from church tower to church tower, and that kind of spaciousness and emptiness has always felt very unhomely to me, and I know it feels like home for lots of people, so this is just a personal thing. So that's one thing. But then there's also the complexity that comes from being Dutch and Flemish. There's kind of a complicated long history there and lots of cultural differences, but combined with speaking the same language. I've worked with quite a lot of Belgian Dutch couples as a wedding photographer over the past years. All of those agreed that the biggest difference between the Dutch and the Flemish people is that they speak the same language. So there's a big expectation of understanding each other and being similar to each other, but then missing all the cultural differences and layers and misunderstanding each other. And so yeah, if we would stay in the Netherlands, then I would forever be the cute Flemish girl or woman, whatever. And if we would move to Belgium, then Bertus would forever be that Dutch guy. One of us would forever be not just a generic foreigner, but a very specific one with specific cultural baggage. And we've known for quite a while that we would prefer being generic foreigners together in another country. Once we started dreaming, we had no idea at all that we were going to end up in Italy. Lots of people who buy a house in Italy is because they have been dreaming for a long time, like, oh yeah, we want to have a house in Italy or in the Mediterranean where like there's good food. And we didn't really have our mind set on Italy at all. We had all our options still open. We considered moving to Germany for a while. We explored the idea of moving to Sweden. We thought about other places like Austria, France, Spain, Portugal, Croatia and Slovenia even. Yeah, we really started looking in a very broad orientation. And as we were looking at real estate in all of those places, we noticed that the type of property that we were really drawn to was easier to find in some of those areas than in others. So two things that we noticed during the process of looking at real estate in various places that were important to us were that we wanted to be within a 1-day drive from our family in Belgium and the Netherlands, so that we could easily still travel up and down for birthday parties or holidays.
Yeah.
And then also because my mother lives in Italy already, it made sense because now we will be kind of close by to, relatively close by, or in the middle at least, of all our family. We will be like the central hub. And the other thing is that I prefer a warmer climate and longer summers, and Bertus prefers a cooler climate, so we kind of had to find a balance between those two. We've tried it out. We've been in Italy multiple times in the hottest months of the year, and for Bertus it's really a struggle.
Too hot.
So the area around the Alps quickly became kind of the zone
of interest.
And then we started looking, I guess, mostly for the type of property that we wanted. And that kind of determined where we ultimately ended up.
We did have an extensive list of criteria to search for our house. For one, we didn't want neighbors to be on our doorstep. There could be neighbors, but not nearby.
We have some traumatic experiences with neighbors in the past. So that was an important one.
Yeah. Also, at least 3 or 4 hectares of land around the house.
Yeah, and that sounds like a lot to many people, but my mother lives on a piece of 3.5 hectares, and for me that sounds maybe really spoiled, but that's kind of normal. And when I'm there, it's already like, 3.5 hectares, it's really not that big. So that I knew that from the beginning that I would want something similar in size, in property size. Yeah, then also we wanted it to be, of course, in nature, but yeah, the 3 or 4 hectares of land already kind of, then you have your 3 hectares of nature. But also we both like the mountains, and we like panoramic views, and we like sunsets. The views and the mountains were maybe not the strongest criteria, but definitely what made certain properties a winner for us versus like okay, but not.
Definitely.
And then
next to the surface area of the land there's also, of course, the service area of the built area. To a different country means seeking different means of income as well in some ways. And one of them would be to have holiday homes in our new home. So we were looking for a property with lots of built surface area for that.
Also important was that we wanted a house that was already connected to mains, to electricity and water, running water, because we wanted to be able to immediately live in the house. The house that we are currently living in the Netherlands is going to be, the whole neighborhood is going to be rebuilt at the end of this year. So we kind of had a deadline that we had to move anyway. So we wanted to kind of have a seamless transition from leaving our current house that we are in now to moving to Italy. We didn't want to have to first move to another house in the Netherlands while we are renovating the Italian house. And we also didn't want to first rent something in Italy from where we then would be renovating the house. It could have been an option, but it would also have been more expensive. And I think we were really ready for a place that really feels like our home. And another temporary thing would have felt like postponing life, if that makes sense. Yeah, not too far from an airport, I guess. That was another one, and not too far away from shops and grocery store and stuff like that. So that was the list that we worked with. And yeah, we very soon scratched all the other Alpine, Central European countries of the list, like, because prices there, the south of Germany is one of the most expensive areas in Germany to buy properties, because lots of German people have holiday homes there, and it's popular with Germans too. And the same in Austria, I guess. And also because of the geography and the way the landscape is shaped, it's not so easy to find farms there that still have their land around the house. That was our impression anyway, that in Germany, but also on the other side of Italy, in the Dolomites, it's way more common for the farms to be kind of clustered together in a small hamlet, and then for the land to be somewhere else, but not directly connected to the house. And for us, that was something that we
wanted.
So yeah, there were 3 regions in Italy that we focused on in our search process. Abruzzo, in the center of the country, not so far from my mom. That would have been a lot closer to where she's currently living. But it's also higher up in the mountains. It's in Apennine region, and we really love the nature and the landscape there. There's gorgeous little mountain villages that are totally unspoiled and still in a very authentic, well-preserved state. We've also been there several times now. We've hiked there, we've worked there. I've shot an elopement there, an elopement wedding. And then the south of Umbria, we also love the nature there. It feels kind of wild, and there's lots of forests and beautiful views, and the Apennine Mountains are close by. The area where my mother lives, it's on the border between Lazio and Umbria. So it's up in the hills, and because of the elevation, the climate is also a bit cooler there. Yeah, so we've visited a few properties there as well.
Yeah. This is one of the first properties we saw. It's in the hills of Lazio. It had 2 hectares of land and an asking price of 120,000 euros. The view of the Apennine mountain tops was great. Half of the property had been renovated for 90%, so habitability was within reach. In general, it ticked a lot of boxes, but the garden just felt a little on the small side. And with 362 square meters built surface area, it would not have enough room for full holiday homes.
And then we looked at Emilia-Romagna, which is kind of a little bit more to the north.
Above Tuscany.
Yeah.
In Emilia-Romagna, we found this property. It had 3.5 hectares of land, 550 square meters built surface area, and a few of the rooms were habitable.
Capito? Grondaia, sì. This is the part for the night.
Yes.
It had good views, wasn't isolated, but felt secluded enough. Sadly, the access road wasn't great. The very steep gravel would require an off-road vehicle which we currently don't have. The floor plans of the two main buildings weren't ideal to have separate apartments in, and a nearby sport airfield might have caused noise. The asking price was €195,000.
And then, of course, there's also Piemonte, where we ultimately bought our house. And that's one of the regions of Italy where we really hadn't been before we started this whole let's find a house in Italy adventure. So we went there for the first time in 2021 in full pandemic time.
Because why not?
We were basically working down our list of visiting all the regions in Italy. We were like, okay, so yeah, let's go to Piemonte. Let's see what that side of the Alps is like. Let's explore. And we really, I think you can say that we fell pretty head over heels in love with it.
One of the houses we viewed in Piemonte is this €230,000 dairy farm. It was in a fairly good condition and habitable. It already had solar panels installed and came with 3.6 hectares of land plus 400 square meters built surface. It included a second adorable cottage, 50 meters further up a steep hill. This would have been perfect for Isa's mother, but alas could only be reached on foot over a narrow garden path. Next to this accessibility issue, the property had neighbors close by overlooking the house.
Yeah, so that's kind of the areas that we settled on. We've also looked at properties north of Milan. It's also close to the mountains, but because of the proximity of Milan, the prices are also much higher there. So yeah, Umbria, Abruzzo, Emilia-Romagna, and Piemonte were kind of like the short list. So now that we're talking about all the reasons why we ended up in Italy, or how we ended up in Italy, there's also a disadvantage, you could say, of renovating an old building in Italy compared to other countries. And that's that Italy has quite strict legislation and rules around what you can do to old properties, and all you need like quite a lot. You need to do lots of paperwork, and there's like lots of processes to get permissions, and it can take quite a lot of time with all the bureaucracy. And there's definitely countries where this is much easier, where you need to do less paperwork for every tiny thing that you want to change. So yeah, that's definitely kind of a downside. But for us, we decided that all the other reasons outweigh that disadvantage. So in the future, when you see us not starting with certain jobs, then it's probably because we're still in the getting the permission to carry out the works process, and not because we're not wanting to begin. That will definitely be something that we will have to learn to navigate and be patient with as well.
One of the reasons why there is such a heavy legislation in Italy with renovating buildings is because Italy has many areas that are very prone to having earthquakes, so you need to make sure that the buildings are constructed correctly.
We scratched a few of those 4 areas of our list because of the risk of earthquakes. My family in Italy, they have one property that's been completely devastated because of earthquakes, and that's been, can't remember what year it was in, and it's still like the whole subsidies from the government to then fix the damage, they're still waiting. So that's something that we really didn't want to
avoid.
So we chose to drop the south of Umbria and to drop Abruzzo from our list, and focus our search on Emilia-Romagna and Piemonte instead.
Here we have a map of Italy with the risk zones for earthquakes. Purple indicates a high risk zone, while grey is the lowest risk zone. The purple belt along the Italian peninsula also indicates the location of the Apennine Mountains. These mountains were shaped by the European tectonic plate coming from the west and colliding here along this fault line with the African plate in the east. And these earthquakes shaped these mountains. There's a few areas where there's a low risk of earthquakes. That's in the southeast here in Apulia, and in northeast in the Dolomites, and in the northwest over here where our house is.
And then there's also the risk of wildfires in Italy, which is more present in the south. So the wildfire risk and earthquake risk were two things that helped our decision-making process into where to focus our search.
Here we have a map of the wildfire risk in Italy. As with the earthquake map, purple indicates the areas with the highest risk of wildfire, while blue has the lowest risk. So yeah, the south has the highest risk because that's the warmest part of the country with the highest temperatures in summer, while the north has a cooler climate. So there's snowfall in the winter, and then there's also the Po Valley in the middle, which has hardly any forest, so there's a low risk of wildfire there. We are located with our house in this little area over here. It's orange because we have some forest there, so there is some risk of forest fires and wildfires, but it's nothing compared to the south with all the purple areas or the red belt along the Ligurian coast.
Yeah, I think for everyone who's at the beginning of a similar journey or in the middle of a similar journey to what we did, I think we have like 3 best advices to give you. And the first is to be open to surprise. We could have never known 10 years ago that we were going to end up in Piemonte and how much like home it would feel there. And if we would have gone into with the attitude of it has to be in a certain place, then we might have never found our dream house so quickly. Or relatively quickly, I mean, because once we actually started searching, we did find our house in 1 year, and that's fairly fast. The fact that we had a deadline also played into it, but we didn't choose our house now because we had a deadline and because we had to be fast. We really left everything open, and we have been really surprised about where we ultimately found our new place. Yeah. The second one is to keep going and to focus on putting one foot in front of the other, letting it be a non-linear process as well, and being patient with that. And the third one, I guess, is find ways to keep the dream alive, because normal life gets in the way. You have your job, you have family, you maybe have children, and all of that requires a lot of energy and sometimes more than others, and there is stress and unexpected things happening, life be lifing. But plant small reminders for yourself into your life that remind you of the dream. And like small things that we did, for instance, was at some point a few years ago, we started taking Italian classes, and going there every week is one of the things that reminds you like, oh yes, why are we doing this? Oh yes, we're dreaming of this house in Italy. So let's make time for that, even though life is lifing in the meantime, and let's look into that and explore this idea and what it could look like. Another thing that we did that sounds maybe super random is I've been dreaming of a bigger garden for a long time, and the idea of being able to go out into the garden and cut your own herbs and use them in cooking is something that I've looked forward to for years. So one of the things I would do is, if we went to Italy, to my mother or to other places, is to cut some wild rosemary or sage or bay leaf, take some herbs with us back and use them back home in our cooking. And every time you take, the jar with Italian rosemary and you use some of it in your food, it reminds you of, yes, this is what I want. This is what I'm working towards. So yeah, find small ways for yourself to keep the dream alive in the craziness of daily existence.